Democrats faint. CIA in charge. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials and the Millennial. Joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. This podcast is called Democrats Faint, CIA in Charge. And, of course, the Democrats are involved in a great feint, which is a great misdirection from where they are and where they want to be, because that's what you have to do when you are completely messing up the economy, when you have inflation that's out of control, when you have decided that the United States of America doesn't have a border, and when you are disengaging with Afghanistan and have decided that thousands of Americans who have been left behind and still want to get out of Afghanistan, you try to do other things. You try to engage in a feint, which is to redirect people's attention to something else. It's like, no, don't look over there at Afghanistan with all of the Americans trying to get out and come back home to the United States. Don't look at what's going to ultimately happen with many of the Afghan people who helped us in Afghanistan for the 20 years that we were there, including the interpreters and people providing us intelligence. Obviously, they're going to be executed by the Taliban. Don't worry about them. We're going to redirect you over here. Case in point, Jen Psaki got into a duke-out with Peter Doocey. Hey, there you go. The Doocey-Psaki duke-out. The Dookies. And they get into this duke-out. And it's, of course, at the White House press conference with Jen Psaki. I always call her Psaki because the P is like supposed to be semi-silent. So it's Jen Psaki, but it's really Psaki. She, anyway, decides to get into a war of words and engages in the initial feint. So in the Daily Caller, Psaki dukes it out with Doocey, says it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded in Afghanistan. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki denied Monday that Americans are stranded in Afghanistan despite national security officials stating Americans aren't able to make it out to Kabul airport for evacuation. And we have that clip of this exchange, and listen to the feint Psaki tries to engage in. Here it is.
Our materials and equipment.
But does the president have a sense that most of the criticism is not of leaving Afghanistan, it's the way that he has ordered it to happen by pulling the troops before getting these Americans who are now stranded? Does he have a sense of that?
First of all, I think it's irresponsible to say Americans are stranded. They are not. We are committed to bringing Americans who want to come home. We are in touch with them via phone, via text, via email, via any way that we can possibly reach Americans to get them home if they want to return home.
There are no Americans stranded is the White House's official position on what's happening in Afghanistan right now.
I'm just calling you out for stating that we are stranding Americans in Afghanistan when we have been very clear that we are not leaving Americans who want to return home. We are going to bring them home. And I think that's important for the American public to hear and understand.
Okay, and then follow.
Americans aren't stranded in Afghanistan, according to Jen Psaki and the Biden administration. You know, they actually were fully prepared to leave and have had no issues getting to the airport, have had no issues with the Taliban and no fear for their lives. So they're all fine. Don't worry. Everything's fine, even though we have to get out by August 31st. And after August 31st, who knows what's going to happen in Afghanistan if you are an American and you are left behind. So there's that. So Peter Doocey is asking what really is a pretty straightforward question. And that straightforward question is to Jen Psaki, what about this idea that Americans believe we should be coming out of Afghanistan? At least the majority of Americans do. We should be disengaging from Afghanistan, at least militarily. But it's the way in which the Biden administration has enabled us to leave, which is to have so many Americans stranded there. And Jen Psaki's like, well, I take exception to that term stranded. I mean, this is the problem now with the modern Democrat Party. It's the same party, of course, that believes that you can be a man and have a baby, that you can be a man and change your sex, that you can go to the MVA and change your gender, and that it's going to just solve everything. It's going to solve all of your problems if you do that. It's going to make everybody think that you really are something different. And so the Democrats have been playing this war on words for a long time. And this war on words is a war on the English language to make you really think that there is no truth. There are no truths. And if there are no truths, then you really can't argue intelligently about anything, which is what the Democrats are trying to do. It's the Democrat feint. And of course, what they'd rather you do, of course, the Democrats, is to not even pay attention to what's going on in Afghanistan. It's not even happening. Don't even pay attention to that. Don't pay attention to the fact that there are 10,000 Americans that are stranded. They're probably less now because, obviously, to be fair, the Biden administration is, after the fact, after seeing all the danger from the Taliban, deciding, okay, well, we kind of need to get them out. We didn't realize there were so many people there. So it's not just that Democrat feint. It's Senator Chuck Schumer. Good old Chucky Schumer, the senator from the state of New York. While, by the way, he's the majority leader in the United States Senate, Chuck Schumer. And here he is in Manhattan at he's at a concert. And at this concert are all of these celebrities, of course, and many millennials and others who are there as well watching the concert. It's kind of a who's who of many people at the concert, particularly people that are performing. And Schumer, while we have this mess going on in Afghanistan, when he really should be in Washington, D.C., and he should be there actually overseeing the United States Senate and overseeing all of the intelligence agencies, overseeing the military, because remember, Congress has oversight of all of these agencies to make sure they're actually doing their job, to hold them to account for what job they're doing. Instead of doing that, no, he's in Manhattan at a concert and he's dancing. And who's he dancing with? Oh, he's dancing with late night host Stephen Colbert. So we have this, and of course there is no talking, speaking of which you can hear in this particular video. If you can see the video on VideoTube because you're watching Mark of the Millennials, then you'll see good old Chucky Schumer dancing with Stephen Colbert. Otherwise, you have to listen to the music. It's rap music in the background, and they're both dancing in the street like, everything's fine. This is the ultimate feint, ladies and gentlemen. Everything's fine. Everything's fine in New York. Don't pay attention. Nothing to worry about. We're just partying. The world is fine. The United States is fine. Inflation, don't worry about that. Well, here's Schumer dancing with Colbert. We got that clip, and here it is. Well, you get the point. So you get the point. You get the point there. It's just basically rap music, but Schumer is like, dancing in his really dorky way of trying to dance to rap music, It's kind of funny, to be honest with you, to watch. But of course, he has to dance with Stephen Colbert. And here is what the New York Post said. Schumer slammed for dancing at New York City concert amid Afghanistan strife. Senator Chuck Schumer was ripped on Twitter for dancing with funny man Stephen Colbert. He's not funny. Backstage at We Love New York City concert amid the ongoing catastrophe in Afghanistan and as the coronavirus pandemic continues to surge across the United States. Backstage antics, wrote Mayor de Blasio's press secretary, Bill Neidhart, in Twitter, posting Saturday before the star-studded concert in Central Park was abruptly canceled because of storms and lightning generated by Hurricane Henry. Well, you know what? That's poetic justice. Here they are having this concert and they're partying like everything's fine, including Bill de Blasio, the single dumbest person ever to serve as New York City mayor. And they have to cancel the concert midway because Hurricane Henry comes in and they've got lightning and rain, heavy rains. Quote, must be a slow news day, wrote a Twitter user, showing a video of Schumer and Colbert dancing alongside images of a child slumped in a man's arms in Afghanistan. Another called out the Senate Majority Leader and the late night talk show host for failing to take the situation seriously. You know what? That's really the issue. That's why we're calling this the Democrat feint, because here we are having the Senate Majority Leader clearly not taking any of the issues in the United States economy or in international affairs seriously. These are not serious people. Quote, good thing there's nothing else going on that may require the Senate Majority Leader's attention. As to Colbert, he becomes less and less relevant with each passing day, a social media user said. Well, that's because Colbert is he's part of the arm of the Democrat Party. He's hiding, as an operative under the guise of being a comedian. But everybody, of course, who's ever watched him realizes he's really not that funny, because what's funny is when you can make fun of everybody and everything and not have just strictly, politically correct type humor, or the acceptable humor, which is to make fun of only one side. Schumer was also blasted for appearing tone deaf, even as thousands of Afghans are desperate to flee Afghanistan and Taliban rule. Well, obviously. And then they have a picture of Schumer dancing. And if you read this article, if you have an opportunity to see this article, and Chris, if you feel like it, you can put this picture up. When you scroll down, there's a picture of Schumer and a couple of the performers, as well as de Blasio. But if you were to hyper focus on de Blasio, he's got this orange shirt on, and he's standing like this, and he's got the shirt says Queens. And then de Blasio just looks like he is high out of his mind, completely and utter, which would be consistent with the way he's governed, because no one would govern the way de Blasio is governed unless they are drug addicted or dazed and confused all of the time. The Taliban is throwing an epic house party, dancing all over the hallowed ground and graves of American servicemen and women, one person tweeted. Others questioned why the city even held the concert as Henry moved up the coast. Not sure why New York City officials ever thought it was a good idea during COVID concert in Central Park when Hurricane Henry was due to hit was a good idea. There's also a picture in the same article, by the way, where maybe 10% of the people at the concert who were watching the concert, the actual, patrons who probably paid to get in, maybe it was free, I'm not really sure, but only 10% are actually wearing masks, which, good for them. At least they're pushing back in New York City. And de Blasio is not wearing a mask. He's on stage, by the way. The concert, which featured LL Cool J, Jennifer Hudson, and Andrea Bocelli, was canceled midway through a number of... no, my gosh. It was canceled in the middle of a number by Barry Manilow. I'm surprised millennials would want to see Barry Manilow. As storm clouds and lightning caused by Henry moved into the area. I'm sorry, that's really funny. I can't help myself. So the Democrats are feigning, of course. They're trying to redirect your attention to this concert and Chuck Schumer dancing in the street. Everything's fine. Meanwhile, of course, not only is the United States economy in great trouble because of inflation and the lack of good jobs, and because so many people aren't back to work, they're not paying their rent. I mean, let me count the ways. But of course, in the international arena, the United States looks like a failed state or a failing state. And that is not good. And here's the opposite of the Democrat feint. Here is Republican Congressman Chip Roy of Texas on this very issue. Here's what a serious politician looks like, ladies and gentlemen. A serious politician during very serious times. And this is a great divide between the Democrat and the Republican Party. We have that clip, and here it is.
But let's just be very clear. The Democratic Party, the leadership of the Democratic Party, has no interest in standing up to an incompetent White House that has left our Americans on the outside looking in, and they want to come back and bring us here to Washington. They want to bring us back here to carry out their progressive leftist agenda. And I can tell you that the people in Texas, we're not having it. Enough of this nonsense. They got to stop putting the leftist policies they want to put up front over the wishes of the people that we represent.
And see, this is all allowed to happen. Chip Roy, of course, laid out his concerns, and he's very emotional and very passionate about this issue. And it's quite real. I think it's really genuine, his concerns. But the reason these things are allowed to happen is because we really don't have a mainstream media that reports anything that is honest anymore. By honest, I mean, wouldn't CBS, NBC, ABC, MSNBC, CNN, just to name a few, wouldn't they want to call out Chuck Schumer doing what he's doing during a time when we have Americans stranded in Afghanistan? Or, of course, as Jen Psaki says, they're not stranded. We're working very hard to get them out. They're not stranded. Yeah, sure, they're not stranded. And there's Chip Roy of Texas just laying it out there. But none of the mainstream media really wants to call the Democrats on their feint, on their misdirection of the truth, on their and it's disgusting. I mean, look, even Stephen Colbert, right? He's a late night host. He's not going to call out anyone on this. In fact, I didn't watch his show, but I wouldn't be surprised if that was one of the clips he showed on his show, or maybe it's on his website, perhaps, with he he and Schumer dancing together. There's no interest in, and because we don't have news anymore that is reported in an honest way and an unbiased way, because we don't have that kind of reporting, we don't have an opportunity to really engage in critical thinking skills. And in normal times, you would have major newspapers across the United States calling out this feint. Absolutely. They'd be saying, you know what? There's a huge feint that isn't being engaged in right now. We have the Democrat Party saying that we don't want you to look over here because things are messed up. We want you to look back at the domestic economy where everything is fine. Really? Everything's fine domestically? I mean, this is just unbelievable. And this Democrat feint, by the way, is continuing with the engagement with the Taliban itself. And this is important, podcast listeners, because in this particular segment of this Democrat feint, this podcast, I want to call this the real United States leader meets with the Taliban. That's right. The real leader of the United States meets with the Taliban. You know who that is? The director of the CIA. That's at least what I think. Guess what? Wall Street Journal. CIA chief William Burns met with senior Taliban figure in Kabul. Secret meeting comes, what's obviously not secret anymore. Secret meeting comes as Biden administration considers whether to extend U.S. evacuation efforts. CIA Director William Burns met secretly with the Taliban's top figure in Kabul on Monday amid a chaotic U.S. effort to evacuate American citizens and Afghans allied with the United States in advance of an August 31 deadline, U.S. officials said. So the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, William Burns, was in Afghanistan, presumably, where he met the Taliban, unless they met in some other location, which is always possible. I kind of doubt it. He went to Afghanistan and just met with the Taliban leaders just yesterday. Who the heck is running the United States government? Is it the CIA? Well, I'm going to read on. Details of the meeting weren't immediately available, but the CIA chief's crisis diplomacy comes as the Biden administration is considering whether to extend the evacuation of tens of thousands of people from Kabul airport beyond the deadline for U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan. So the CIA chief is saying, well, we can't get this done by August 31st. And the Taliban set that date as the deadline date, the drop dead date. And so the United States of America under Biden, I presume, sent in the CIA director, William Burns, to Afghanistan. Why? Why wouldn't it be the State Department? I mean, is it because we have a bunch of wimps running the State Department? I mean, wouldn't that make sense? Send someone in from the State Department? I mean, it just shows who is probably in charge of the United States. The Central Intelligence Agency declined to comment on Mr. Burns' meeting with the Taliban. Well, of course, they declined to comment. The leader of the Taliban, Abdul Ghani Baradar, which was earlier reported by the Washington Post, concern is rising among U.S. officials in the United States and other nations about security conditions around the Kabul airport. I mean, talk about understatement. Senior U.S. officials have warned that terrorists from the Islamic State's Afghan affiliate could attack the crowds massed outside the airport. Officials also fear the Taliban and its allies, who have not attacked U.S. military personnel during the evacuation, could change their posture after August 31st. Yeah, could. Quote, the threat to the airport is very real and very substantial, said House Intelligence Committee Chairman, Representative Adam Schiff, Democrat, California. Adam Schiff. After the committee received a classified briefing Monday evening from U.S. spy agencies, Mr. Schiff specifically cited the Islamic State affiliate known as ISIS-K. Quote, it's a very real risk to our aircraft and to our personnel, to people who have congregated around the airport, Mr. Schiff said. The meeting between Mr. Burns, a seasoned diplomat and former Deputy Secretary of State, with Mr. Baradar appears to be the highest level engagement between the Biden administration and the Taliban to date. It was the CIA's chief's second visit. This is the second time this CIA chief has been to Afghanistan. Weeks after taking office in March, he traveled to Kabul for talks with the now defunct government of President Ashraf Ghani in the wake of President Biden's announcement that he would be withdrawing the remaining U.S. troops from Afghanistan. So the article continues, but you get the gist here. We have a CIA chief and we have a State Department. The purpose of the State Department is to be the part of government, the department in government that speaks on behalf of the president inside of foreign countries. And they actually have the negotiations with the foreign government. And fine, if you want to include someone from the military to be part of that, to demonstrate that you are speaking softly and carrying a big stick, okay, that's fine. But that's not what happened. We sent the CIA chief, and it just really makes you wonder, I'm going to say it again, who's really running this war? And who's really running the United States government? Is it really a government where civilians are still in charge? Or is it the military industrial complex? Or is it being run by all of the so-called services that are highly secretive and what appears to be services and like the CIA and the NSA, and just go on and on. So if that weren't enough to prove this point, and at least to, if not prove the point, at least raise questions. The former CIA director said it was a, quote, good idea to send MAGA-wearing unvaxxed Americans to Afghanistan. This is what the former CIA director said. So I have to read this just briefly so that you can get, he tweeted it, okay? He didn't say it, so we don't have a clip on it. In the Daily Wire, former CIA director says it's a good idea to send MAGA-wearing unvaxxed Americans to Afghanistan. On Sunday morning, former CIA director General Michael Hayden, so that was just last Sunday, who had already been widely criticized for retweeting a split image comparing former President Trump's supporters to the Taliban, doubled down, replying, good idea, to a suggestion that MAGA-wearing unvaxxed Americans should be sent to Afghanistan. So he says, good idea, and retweets this guy's handle, which is Joey G, and says, Joey G says, can we send the MAGA-wearing unvaxxed to Afghanistan? No use sending that plane back empty. And so General Michael Hayden, the former director of the CIA, retweeted that and said, good idea. On Thursday, Hayden retweeted that split image. The top showed black-clad Islamic militants waving guns and flags from a line of pickup trucks and cars with the caption reading, they're Taliban. And beneath it was a line of pickup trucks hoisting American flags and Trump 2020 flags with the caption, our Taliban. This is what the former CIA chief Hayden decided to tweet. In June 2018, Hayden compared the Trump administration's immigration policies to Nazi concentration camps that were used to murder millions of Jews during World War II. Now think about this. We have an open border, and we have individuals coming into our country from all over the world across our southern border. We all know it's happening. Many of them are infected, and they're coming into our country. They're making the pandemic worse. And many of them, we don't know who they are or what their intentions are. And this guy, of course, he went after the Trump administration's policies of saying, no, you actually can't come in the United States and just cross the border. You actually have to apply first, and we have to do a lot of due diligence on you to find out who you are and where you're from, to find out if you actually want to contribute to our country, let alone just come here and be a taker. Oh, wow. I said that, right? God forbid I said that. No, we don't want takers. We want people who are going to contribute. We want people who share our values and share our vision for a better way of life, a better economy. So Michael Hayden then tweeted, other governments have separated mothers and children. And he has a picture of, I think, Auschwitz, where they've separated the mothers and the children at the concentration camp. And he did this in June 26th of 2018 during the Trump administration. So obviously, it's pretty fair to say that the former CIA director, Hayden, didn't like former President Donald Trump very much. But that's not enough, okay? That's not quite enough, because I want to read something to you about Michael Hayden, the former CIA chief, and I want to bring up a much larger issue in the United States government. And this is an important issue, ladies and gentlemen. I want you to listen very carefully about what our systemic problem is in government now in the United States, especially with folks in the military I'm talking about the top brass in the military, and I'm talking about the top brass at the CIA and the top brass at the NSA and other individuals who have previously served in cabinets, regardless of party affiliation. So here is what Michael Hayden's bio is in Wikipedia. Listen carefully. He was born in 1945. He's retired U.S. Air Force 4-star general. He's the former director of the National Security Agency, so he was also head of the NSA. He was principal director of National Intelligence and director of the Central Intelligence Agency. He currently chairs the Bipartisan Policy Center's Electric Grid Cybersecurity Initiative. In 2017, Hayden became a national security analyst for CNN. He was director of the National Security Agency from 1999 to 2005. During his tenure as director, he oversaw the controversial NSA surveillance of technological communications between persons in the United States and alleged foreign terrorist groups, which resulted in the NSA's warrantless surveillance controversy. So here's the guy who was the head of the CIA, also previously head of the NSA, and he was engaged in spying on Americans without any warrant whatsoever. And so just to be clear, the NSA warrantless surveillance system, and their program, I should say, refers to the surveillance of persons within the United States, including U.S. citizens, during the collection of nationally foreign intelligence, or notionally foreign intelligence, by the national security agencies. So in other words, he could listen to what you were talking about on the phone and what you were writing on your computer and any of your electronic devices without a warrant. Oh, isn't that great? Isn't that comforting? On April 21, 2005, then Lieutenant General Hayden was confirmed by the U.S. as the first principal deputy director of the National Intelligence and awarded his 4th star, making him the highest-ranking military intelligence officer in the United States. He served in this position under DNI John Negroponte in 2006. So this is where I want to go. Here's what it also says. Here's where he is now, General Hayden. He is currently a principal at the Chertoff Group, a security consultancy co-founded by former Homeland Security Secretary Michael Chertoff. He also serves on the board of directors for the Atlantic Council, Motorola Solutions, and Colbert International, a military contractor that oversees operations for Homestead Temporary Shelter for Unaccompanied Children. Interesting. So this guy, the former CIA director, Michael Hayden, went after Trump time and again because of his border policies of not allowing people to cross the border and making them stay in Mexico and having them vetted there or turned back home. It just so happens that this is the same guy that is part of Colbert International, a military contractor that oversees operations for Homestead Temporary Shelter for Unaccompanied Children. In other words, he makes money by building these temporary shelters for unaccompanied minors and other illegal immigrants when they're built in the United States of America, which is probably why he was so anti-Trump, because Trump wouldn't even allow them into the country in the first place and wanted to completely stop immigration, illegal immigration, that is. Trump did illegal immigration by building the border wall. And of course, Hayden wanted to profit from it and was clearly profiting from it and is, because that's where he still is. He's still with that firm, among others. And so this is the problem that I have. You have these folks in the CIA, they're able to engage in these warrantless surveillance acts. And then you have the current CIA leader going to the Taliban and meeting them in Afghanistan on behalf of the United States. I mean, I'm sorry. I just have a problem with that. I just have a general problem with a president of the United States and a vice president of the United States and the diplomats in the State Department not being the ones to drive this issue with Afghanistan. Instead, we're having the spies and the spoofs doing this. And that's very uncomfortable because it sure looks to me like they are the ones in charge. And meanwhile, where is Joe Biden? Nowhere to be seen. You know where Kamala Harris is? Oh, she's doing a tour in Asia. She's in Southeast Asia doing a tour. By tour, I mean she's visiting countries in Southeast Asia. She's not. I mean, it's laughable. It's laughable. They're clearly, Biden and Harris, clearly to me, are not running the United States government. And I think this kind of proves it because no normal president, in my opinion, would do this. And I'm sorry if you're in the military and if you are in the United States government or you're in a government official currently and you disagree with me, that's fine, because I have a real problem now in the 21st century with these secret agencies having so much power, including the power to negotiate on behalf of the civilian government. It's just something really wrong with that. So get this, podcast listeners. Justin Trudeau talks about the she session and the she recovery. I think we're going to call him Justin Trudeau. So Justin Trudeau is the guy who's in charge of Canada, and he is Justin Trudeau. I think that's what we should call him. He apparently was asked some questions, and of course, in Canada, the economy is not so great. And good old Justin Trudeau decided to come back. And it says here in Mediaite, Trudeau calls for a she recovery to counter the she session in response to conservative childcare and economic plan. So in response to childcare and economic plan proposed by Canada's Conservative Party, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this week called for countering the she session and turning into a she recovery. You can't actually be serious about recognizing what sort of challenges Canadian families and our Canadian society have faced over the past 17 months without recognizing that women were and are harder hit by the crisis than others, said Trudeau on Tuesday. Where's the data on that? I mean, give me a break. This is just absurd. Quote, that's why it's so inexplicable that they don't recognize, perhaps ideological reasons, that they've always had issues with childcare over the past decades. Fine, said Trudeau, and the leader of the Liberal Party. But the results are in. It's not just a social program, it's an economic program. Oh my gosh, the Conservatives have an economic program. Well, here you have it, of course. Even the Liberals and the Progressives in foreign countries, such as Canada, try to divide people by race, by sex, by everything. They're all about dividing. Case in point, that's what Justin Trudeau is doing. And of course, Justin Trudeau sees himself as, kind of this GQ figure, Mr. Really good looking, and I'm going to really act like I really care about the women. Well, we have the clip on this, and it's in Justin Trudeau's own words about the she recession. And here it is.
It is exactly the example of the kinds of things you need to do to counter the she session and turn it into a she recovery. Fact is, the Conservatives don't talk about that in their lengthy platform.
So the Conservatives in Canada, according to Prime Minister Trudeau, don't talk about the she session and the she recovery. It's absurd. It's just absurd. This is, again, the whole feint, once again, on the Liberal side and the Democrat side, no matter what country, and that is to try to manipulate the English language so as to divide people or to redirect them. So here is what Rondi Adamson says in the Wall Street Journal opinion section. Shortly after calling a federal election for September 20th, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau vowed to counter the she session and turn it into a she recovery. Excuse me while I she-gurgitate. Trudeau went on to criticize the Conservative Party, saying that they do not talk about such things in their lengthy platforms. I guess they're she-historic. This isn't the first time Mr. Trudeau has used she-recession, and he is always pleased with himself when he says it, given that he made these comments and called the election against the backdrop of the impending she-recession and she-pression in Afghanistan. An embarrassed expression might have been more appropriate. Mr. Trudeau likes to use language creatively to burnish his feminist credentials. In 2018, he appeared at a town hall in Edmonton, Alberta, and a woman in the audience used the word mankind in her question to him. Mr. Trudeau interrupted her and mansplained, quote, "We like to use the word peoplekind." After being mocked for it, Mr. Trudeau said he was joking. So a lady in the audience in 2018 asked Trudeau about something, and she used the word mankind in her question. And Trudeau's like, "We like to use the word peoplekind here, peoplekind, you know." And then, of course, the media and the Conservatives and everybody just completely, roasted this guy and said, "What an idiot you are. I mean, why are you focusing on manipulating the language? Why don't you just focus on running the country?" And they just laughed him. And you know what? There's an election coming up, because he called the election in Canada, and the chances are he'll probably still get reelected. And it's all based, I'm convinced, on the way he looks. I mean, obviously, Canada is a left-leaning country, to say the least. But this guy is really the true dope. Justin Trudeau. He's not Justin Trudeau. And it just gets funnier and funnier. The fact that he's being roasted in the Wall Street Journal and even roasted at home over the she-recession is just hysterical. So get this, podcast listeners, ballot harvesting 101. You want to take ballot harvesting 101? Well, move to California. Get this story. Of course, Democrats say, by the way, ballot harvesting never happens. It just never, ever, ever happens. I mean, it's impossible. Well, just reported a few hours ago, hundreds of California recall ballots, drugs, and a loaded gun is found out in a passed out felon's car. So this guy's in a car in California. He's passed out because he's obviously high on drugs, got a gun, got drugs in the car, and he also happens to have hundreds of recall ballots. Remember, Gavin Newsom is being recalled. The election is on September 14th. This guy has hundreds of recall ballots in his car, and he's a felon. So the police in Torrance, California, said that the ballots would be sent ahead of Governor Newsom's recall election on September 14th. Hundreds of ballots for California Governor Gavin Newsom's recall election, drugs, and a loaded gun were found last week in a vehicle where a felon just passed out inside, authorities said Monday. Now, of course, even though this happened last week, it was only finally just reported in the mainstream media this week. Police responded to a call of a man passed out in a vehicle in a 7-Eleven parking lot, of course, in Torrance, California, on August 16th, the Torrance Police Department said. During the investigation, officers learned the suspect was a felon and had Xanax pills in his possession. Police said a further investigation found thousands of pieces of mail, including over 300 ballots for the upcoming recall election of embattled Governor Gavin Newsom, and they were all inside of his car. In addition to the mail and ballots, police found a loaded firearm, methamphetamines, a scale, a multiple California driver's licenses, and credit cards in other people's names. Police said new election ballots were being sent to those identified through the investigation, and that the incident was not tied to any additional thefts and election ballots. It was not immediately clear how the ballots ended up in the suspect's vehicle. Give me a break. Or what he intended to do with them. Police said the incident is being investigated in partnership with the U.S. Postal Service and the Los Angeles County District Attorney Public Integrity Unit. So, podcast listeners, let's break this down. We have a guy in California. He's a felon, drug addict, has a gun, so he's probably a drug dealer as well, because he's got a scale in his car as well. So he's obviously weighing the drugs. and he has hundreds of ballots in his car. So what does he have in his car that's worth money? Drugs are worth money. The gun is worth money. And the ballots are worth money. The credit cards he stole, those are worth money. The IDs he stole, those are worth money. And where would you steal those? You could probably steal them from the post office if you had someone that was part of the post office in an inside job, or you could just go from mailbox to mailbox. It's very common, by the way, in California. There have been articles throughout California and elsewhere speaking of this very issue. In fact, Victor David Hansen spoke of this issue a number of times too, where you have these gangs of illegal immigrants and they'll just go and open people's mailboxes literally right after the post office comes by and puts the mail in your mailbox, and they'll steal everything that's in there in the hopes that you either had a driver's license mailed to you or you had a credit card, renewal credit card mailed to you. They steal them and they use them, or they sell them. They make money from them. Guess what else is mailed to you? Your ballot is mailed to you in California because you vote by mail. And we were always told by Democrats, nothing can go wrong. Mail is the most secure way of doing it. Well, this guy has 300 of these recall ballots in his car. And what do you think he's going to do with them? Is he going to fill them out? No, of course he's not. He's going to sell them to someone who is going to fill them out. And if California really wants to get a handle on what's really going on in their elections, perhaps they should do a sting operation and find out whom is going to buy these ballots from this felon. Because you wouldn't take the ballots and have them all organized in bags. If you look at the picture online in this article, he's got the ballots and they're all neatly organized inside of bags, which leads one to believe that either A, he stole them from the mailboxes, or B, he stole them from the post office from someone who either works there or he just went there and he stole them himself. And why would he think that they had value? Because someone is going to pay him for them and they're going to fill them out. And obviously it's a Democrat who's going to do it. It's not going to be a Republican. It's going to be a Democrat because that's what they do. It's called ballot harvesting, ladies and gentlemen. You rip off the ballots and you rip off people's ID. You fill in the ballots because the ballots already had their name and so forth on them, and you mail them back in. Probably you don't even have to do that now. You just put them in a Dropbox. And that's how cheating occurs. It's called ballot harvesting 101. And yet in the United States of America, we have a Democrat Party that's saying, oh no, mail-in balloting is fine. Ballot harvesting is fine. Nothing ever goes wrong. It's why the Democrats are so beside themselves with this idea that the Republican Party throughout many Republican states is passing bills that requires voter ID, in-person voting, unless you have a real reason you can't vote in person. And they are trying to get rid of, in places like Texas, the idea of 24-hour drive-through voting. You know, it's like, it's so stupid, right? You got people drive-through voting because of the pandemic. And of course, you got the Democrats saying, well, drive-through voting should be legal everywhere, and it should be 24-hour drive-through voting everywhere because you're trying to limit people's opportunity to vote if you get rid of that. And as a conservative, common sense conservative, I'm going to say this to you. We need to get back to the common sense idea of voting in person. And voting in person means there is an election day. And if you want to have election week, okay, fine. Let's compromise. Let's have election week. You get to vote for 7 days straight. Not every day, of course. You have 7 days to vote. They're all in a row. And you must vote in person. And for those individuals who can show a reason, and obviously this will be very reasonable, the reason, you're afraid of COVID because you're elderly. But I thought that's what the vaccine was for. But okay, fine. You can't get to the polling station for a variety of reasons because you were ill. Fine, then vote by mail. But you still need to provide an ID. And that ID needs to be, let's see. You need to put your driver's license number on the card. Maybe the last four of your social. Maybe some other IDs. Just some way of verifying that you are the one that actually filled out the ballot and mailed it in. And you must mail it in, not drop it off at a post office, at a drop box. Not even a post office drop box. It's a drop box that the election board runs, not even the post office. You should have to mail it in using the USPS. It just makes perfect sense. But I just want to say this. The Democrats, by the way, in Washington, still want to pass H.R. 1. They still want to pass H.R. 1. That is the bill that is a federal takeover of elections that, number one, enables ballot harvesting. Number two, prohibits, stops you from using voter ID. Stops you from doing it. I mean, can you imagine? And then encourages, of course, 24-hour voting centers because you need, hey, look, you need to have 24-hour voting centers because after all, there are some people that just can't vote between the hours of 7 a.m. and 8 p.m. I mean, and they can't do it 7 days. They can't do it in that 7-day period for voting. It's just impossible. We have to really find ways of just laughing at Democrats in their face over this issue because it really is hysterically funny. I'm very proud that in the Maryland House of Delegates on the House floor, and this is on my personal YouTube page. I think it's the Mark Fisher for Delegate YouTube page. There is a debate, if you will, and it's a very measured debate on the Maryland House of Delegates floor, whereby I'm debating an amendment that I propose to prohibit ballot harvesting in the state of Maryland. And what was fascinating to me is that on the other side of the aisle, the person defending it, who, by the way, did the best she could, and she's a nice person. But her excuse was, well, Delegate Fisher, ballot harvesting doesn't happen in the state of Maryland. Well, actually, in statute in Maryland, you can ballot harvest. All you need to do is have the person whose ballot you are assisting with and carrying to the drop box or to the post office or to the election board. You just need to have them sign an affidavit. So what you need to do is photocopy about 5,000 affidavits, pretty easy to do. And you just have the person put their name there and sign it. And then you can act as their agent. And that's ballot harvesting, first of all, right? And so I think I even brought up the point, well, isn't that problematic? Because couldn't you just go and pay people to do it? Couldn't you? Does anyone try to, in the election board, does anyone verify that that affidavit is valid? And of course they don't. They don't. And they just take that piece of paper and they put it in a file somewhere. And if that, I doubt they do. I doubt they even put it in a file. They probably just throw it away. And this gets back to the same thing that just happened in California. Ballot harvesting occurs because there is mass mail out of ballots from the election board to everybody's post office box or to their mailbox. Almost always it's a mailbox. And so it's very easy to steal all of those ballots that were mailed out. Or if you don't want to do that, then you can just ballot harvest. So what you do is you go to areas where there is very low participation in elections. By the way, those tend to be minority areas. It's true. And you go door to door and you offer to buy their ballot for them. And that's why this guy in California, podcast listeners, that's why this guy in California had all those ballots. He didn't have them because he wants Gavin Newsom to win or Gavin Newsom to lose. Why would he care? He's a felon. He's a drug addict. He sells drugs. He's got a scale in his car. The reason he has all of those ballots is because there is someone who's willing to pay him for those ballots. And that someone is a ballot harvester. And they're going to fill out those ballots and they're going to cheat in a very, very closely contested election where that could make all of the difference in the world in an election. Think about that. And that's ballot harvesting 101. So next up, podcast listeners, Cuomo, former governor of New York, Cuomo, leaves his dog behind. I'm sorry. By the way, just so you know, podcast listeners, I'm an animal lover. I am an animal lover. I've always had a dog from a kid. As long as I can remember, there's always a dog in my family's life. And that's been the same way as an adult. And recently, not long ago, I think a couple months ago, we lost our our 14-year-old Old English sheepdog. And so my wife's already, of course, now that she's slowly but surely recovering from that loss, she's already looking at dogs, So I am a dog lover. All right. But Andrew Cuomo apparently is not. Andrew Cuomo moved out of the governor's mansion and left his dog, according to a report from Daily Wire. So here's what it says. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who resigned 2 weeks ago, moved out of the governor's mansion in Albany, the state capital, this weekend ahead of his farewell address, which is slated to happen Monday, which was yesterday, by the way. But he left a family member behind, according to the Albany Times-Union. Cuomo's dog, Captain, his dog's name is Captain, a high-strung mix of Shepherd, Siberian, and Malamute. The heck's that? Known to nip staff members. So Cuomo had a biting dog. It probably bit women only, especially in the behind, seeing it was Cuomo's dog. Known to nip staff members, is still in residence in Albany, even though his owner, Andrew Cuomo, has returned to Westchester County. Governor Cuomo, who has been staying with one of his sisters in Westchester County in the final days of his third term, recently has asked staff members at the executive mansion if anyone would like to keep his dog. Captain is this dog, who has remained at the state-owned residence after the governor moved out last week, the Times-Union said Monday. Quote, two state police sources, quote, two state police sources told the Times-Union on Saturday that the governor had recently asked mansion staff members if anyone would be interested in caring for the dog. Captain, a high-strung mix of Shepherd, Siberian, and Malamute, has nipped a few people since Cuomo adopted him in 2018. Well, apparently, so is Andrew Cuomo. The sources said a mansion staffer recently took the dog home for a few days, but decided the dog was just too much. Is she talking about the dog or is she talking about Cuomo? A spokesman for the governor, Richard Azzopardi, lashed out at the Times-Union, however, claiming that the arrangement was temporary because the governor, who is scheduled to resign from office at 11:59 p.m. yesterday, is planning to take a vacation. Captain is part of the governor's family, and your nameless, ill-informed source to imply that they've trying to give him away is untrue, Azzopardi said, per the Intelligencer. Azzopardi then added that Cuomo has more important things to deal with, like the hurricane bearing down on the East Coast, was not the governor anymore. Give me a break. He has nothing to do. Regardless, the New York State Animal Protection Federation promptly put out a statement expressing its dismay and suggesting that Captain be placed at a humane animal shelter. Cuomo is expected to deliver his final address as governor yesterday. His aide, Melissa DeRosa, told the Intelligencer Monday that he does not plan to run for a third term in office, though he is technically still able to. Can you imagine? He resigned in disgrace as governor of New York, and there's nothing in New York's constitution preventing him from running for a third term. The Free Beacon reported also Monday that regardless of DeRosa's comments, Cuomo is still raising money, ostensibly to finance his next run for governor or to position himself as a kingmaker in the coming open elections. A top Democrat National Committee firm is allowing outgoing New York Governor Andrew Cuomo to solicit donations, even as party leaders and fundraising platforms have abandoned the scandal-plagued Democrat in the wake of sexual harassment allegations. Maybe he left the dog behind because the dog was a sexual predator too. Just entirely possible. And I'll just finish with this. Cuomo also granted clemency to a convicted murderer, a member of the Weather Underground, just before leaving an office. If you can imagine that. I mean, talk about a complete creep. And then related to that, in the Daily Caller, San Francisco District Attorney says his father, convicted murderer and former member of the terrorist group, Weather Underground, should get out of prison. And that's the guy that Andrew Cuomo just gave clemency to. So the guy who was in prison, his son is the district attorney for San Francisco. And the prisoner ended up getting clemency from Andrew Cuomo just before Cuomo left office. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, folks. I mean, talk about the ultimate Democrat feint, you know. But we now know what Democrats actually think about dogs, at least dogs that are predators. Well, that's it for Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.